Hey everyone, welcome to the Canine Culture Podcast, where we talk about everything dog. Q&As with veterinarian professionals, rescue operators, everyday topics. We cover everything dog on this podcast. So make sure you subscribe to the Canine Culture Podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you're following us on social media on both Instagram and Facebook. Thanks again for listening. Now here's that next episode. Welcome everyone to episode 13 of the Canine Culture Podcast. This is Brittany, and I have a special guest here. Her name is Nicole. So welcome to the show, Nicole.
Hi, so glad to be on today.
So we are going to chat a little bit about service dogs and emotional support dogs. I think it's a topic that's becoming more and more prevalent. We probably need a little more education around it. Not a lot of people know too much about it. So we're just going to kind of talk about it. And we're going to jump right in. And Nicole, do you want to talk about what each of those mean to you? So what's an emotional support dog versus what's a service dog?
Yeah, so um I think everyone's kind of got like that general idea of an emotional support animal, especially with like the things people have been trying to bring on airplanes lately. Um, but an emotional support animal is an animal that helps a person deal with the weight of processing emotions, whether that's anxiety or depression or anger. And so, even though people have been like, this is my emotional support peacock, it really needs to be an animal that's accessible to you, and that does have some supportive property. Like maybe you found the world's best peacock, and it just like snuggles up when you need it. But typically, it's a household animal that is small enough to snuggle. Um, and some emotional support animals are trained, but a lot of them are really just intuitive. Um, Cats, dogs, occasionally birds, but really like an animal who kind of senses that you have a mood change or is willing to allow you to kind of like hold on to them while you're like processing that emotion.
Right.
Now,
So not my dogs, because my dogs are like, hey, you're sad? Okay, so feed us and pet us, and we don't care about you. And I'm like, okay.
uh-huh. Yep.
I'm their emotional support human.
Yeah, most dogs have emotional support humans. Yeah.
All right. So then conversely, a service dog, which is much more in depth.
Yeah. So service dogs span so much more than just emotional needs. Now, service dogs will definitely also help with emotional needs, but it's specifically a dog trained in a task that helps the trainer or the handler with a coping. That might be a diabetic service dog would alert to a drop in blood sugar. An epileptic service dog would alert to um, a coming seizure. A psychiatric support dog would alert to um, a coming, anxiety attack or panic attack or PTSD episode. Um, Likewise, those dogs also are great at creating space between their handlers and the public, or going to get help if that person needs help. So, in the case of a PTSD support dog, that would be like physically putting space between their handler and the public to even just prevent, having an episode. Um, with a seizure dog, it's both alerting and then also creating that barrier space around their handler in the case of a seizure. A lot of diabetic support dogs are trained to alert to blood sugar drops, go get any kind of like diabetic approved drink that they've been trained to. Like some people are like, I need an orange juice,
Mm-hmm.
or like I need a Glucerna. And then also are likewise trained to call 911, like still blows my mind, like call 911 in case
Right.
of like diabetic coma. But they're like very, very specifically trained um, for like identifiable tasks.
Yeah. So the way I think about it is if the dog is working, literally working, so leading someone that cannot see or working or performing a task. So, like you said, alerting them that some medical condition is awry. And when I was researching these earlier, I actually thought it was interesting that I mean there isn't a true protocol for training a service dog. I mean, there's companies that do it. You can do it on
Yeah,
your own. It's a little bit free range. And then same thing with an emotional support dog. I mean, there's no like official training, which I think that's some of the reason we're seeing more people kind of push those boundaries. But then
yeah,
at the same time, I hate to play devil's advocate, but I'm going to. I mean, think about flying with your dog. If it's a smaller dog, it's like 125 each way, which is super expensive. Conversely, if your dog's too big, you've got to put them down with the cargo, which is not air controlled.
no,
I forget the percentage of dogs that pass away when they're under the cargo. I want to say it's more than 50%. That was the last stat that I saw.
scary large percentage.
And you're still paying. You're paying a large amount of money for them to be under there. So I think that's why so many people started to really press and be like, well, I have a service dog, I have an emotional support dog. And that kind of led to the legislation in January of 2021 that no longer allows emotional support dogs to fly the same way that service dogs did.
Yeah,
So it's unfortunate. I understand it to an extent, but at the same time, the mere cost of trying to travel with your animal, and then same thing with like apartments and hotels. I mean, so many apartments are breed restrictive or no dog at all, or your dog has to be under 25 pounds. So you almost invited people to try to break the system or push the system, if you will.
yeah. Um, so even though there's like no specific training, the American Kennel Club
Right. Hmm.
Association or something, they do have kind of like a test, like an official, well, it's officially recognized by the Kennel Association. So still
Unofficially
kind of,
official.
yeah. But it's like essentially a step above the first three behavioral training tests. So the first level is like what you would get the certificate that took your dog to obedience school, like PetSmart. And then the second is like now your dog is, certified to participate in shows, like agility or barn training or those kind of shows. The third
Hmm.
one essentially produces a certificate that you can take with you that says like my dog is trained and I prove to someone else, not me, that my dog is trained.
Right.
It is wild to have to buy a full plane ticket for your lap dog. And so I totally understand. I was that person that brought my husky on the subway and was like, ask me about my service dog. So I definitely get it. But I feel like if we're going to then be like no emotional support dogs, it's like a step closer to be like no service dogs. And there should be a standard way of saying like this is how we expect this kind of service animal to behave. And
Right. Right. I mean, because the ADA already regulates the questions you can ask. So you can ask two questions. You can ask, is the service dog needed for a disability? And what work or task can that dog perform? And that's all you can ask someone with a service dog. So if the ADA is already regulating that, and if you've also got the FHA kind of putting their hands in there with some regulation, the Fair Housing Act, because you can't discriminate against a service dog based on, well, anything. um, I think it's a little trickier with emotional support animals. You're not supposed to be able to discriminate against emotional support animals, but yeah, that's a whole other topic. But ultimately, with service dogs, I mean, we've already got all these regulations. So I don't know if it would be damaging to require a certain certification process. I could see how it might not be feasible because then if you have more governmental bodies involved, it could get more expensive. So I think we're walking a fine line, but I do think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're gonna see a shift. We're gonna see a change in something, whether that's a bigger, like you said, more of a crackdown. We already cracked down on emotional support dogs. We're gonna crack down on service dogs as well, or are we gonna go back the opposite direction? So I think that'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. And I think right now we're moving more towards not accepting emotional support dogs and service dogs.
I think too, for people who are, you know, flying under the radar with a pet that's not necessarily for emotional support, but is well trained. Like again, I'm the person with the emotional support husky on the train. But I think what's important is to recognize that by, taking advantage, of this classification, there is a chance that you might make it more difficult for other people who do need that service animal, who do need that support animal to bring that animal with them. And so being mindful of that, like make sure that your pet is trained, not even for like a specific task, just like not lunging at people, sitting when asked. Um,
Having
just
recall.
like
Yeah.
recall, so important, so important. Like a polite dog, a dog that people like, oh, your dog is so like that kind of
Hmm.
pet. Make sure your animal is trainable. Again, peacocks are not trainable,
Yeah.
and neither are pigs. Like super cute, not trainable. If you can prevent your animal from defecating whenever or wherever they feel like, not an appropriate outside emotional support animal.
And that's actually one of the criteria for a lot of I'm going to put it in air quotes, training programs. Some of them I think are kind of scams, but so many of them are, can your dog not use the bathroom and then proceed to go on command? So it's like a next level to being potty trained, not just, hey, they don't go in the house, but also um, they essentially can go on command.
Hmm. My emotional support pet is begging for attention, um, which is a great time to bring up that to agree. Yes, potty on command, huge. Even if you don't have an emotional support animal, honestly, potty on command is huge. It makes it so much easier to bring your pet with you to places.
Hmm.
Um, I think hand signaling is also super important. What if you're in a loud space? What if you're really not able to vocalize commands? I think it's important to be able to get your pet's attention, with your verbal cues and your verbal signals, and also have your pet pay attention only to your verbal cues and your nonverbal signals. Um, and really, that's a safety thing for you, for your pet, for everyone. That just
Right.
makes it so much easier to navigate every space with those in place.
Yeah, we started working with a few different trainers, and actually our first couple sets of homework were nonverbal. So the way it was explained to me was that dogs are more receptive to reading signs and hands and like just different gestures. That is more effective for your dog than you saying things to them, especially if you're using words that you're going to repeat in conversations or throughout, or you're saying them frequently. So, just like a general training tip is, using hand signals for different things. So, for us, if you point your finger up, like just straight up in the air, that means sit. And if you point your finger down, that's down. And quite frankly, we have not worked on any other hand signals because I'm trying to make sure we 100% know those. But at the same time, none of my dogs have good recall, so I'm trying to work on that because recall is huge.
Yeah.
And it kind of brings up one thing I was going to talk about, and I think more people are talking about this on TikTok, on social media. If a service dog comes up to you and it does not have a human with it, that means the human needs help.
Yeah.
And I kind of think we should have been taught this in school because if you would have told me this 2 years ago, if a service dog were to come up to me without a human, I would have just hugged the dog and I would have pet him illegally because you're not supposed to pet him or distract him. And I would not have known, oh, he's working, follow him.
Yeah.
So, for anyone listening, service animal comes up to you, you need to follow them to wherever they're taking you.
Yep. There's all service dogs with a harness on, in work mode should have a human attached. And not having a human attached is a very, very big problem. And I think it's great that we have methods like this podcast and TikTok for bringing those things to light, because it is something that I think we don't even think about teaching in our schools or to our kids, other than like, don't pet the dog without permission. It's kind of seen like, oh, well, you're not really going to run into any service dog. So it's like not even this thing that we need to address or to look at.
Well, even saying like, don't pet the service dog, I don't even think a lot of people know that. I mean, I think when I was in the airport the other day and the number of people that came up to pet this guy's service dog and kids, parents weren't telling their children, hey, that dog's working. And so everyone is trying to pet the dog, everyone's trying to talk to the dog. And unfortunately, it was making the man very uneasy. He was getting very anxious. So doing the complete opposite. And the dog was, of course, trying to stay focused, but he had so many people trying to distract him and pull his attention away. So I don't know where that breakdown has been with the general public, but I mean, you should never, ever talk to a service dog. You shouldn't pet a service dog. You should never distract them away from their work because they might be waiting on maybe a raise in their owner's heart rate or their blood sugar or their blood pressure. And that mere distraction, I mean, that really could be life or death for so many people.
Yeah. I think the best way to remember is like that dog doesn't exist. There is no dog.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I love petting dogs in the street. I live
Mm-hmm.
in Brooklyn. I have the opportunity to pet as many dogs as I want. And so I always have to like do like a double take and pause when I see a service dog, because I'm automatically like, oh, this dog wants treats, and like
Yes, I do the
it's
same thing.
yep. It's so important to just like take that pause. And for me, if I see the dog, I want to pet it. So the best way for me is like, there is no dog. Like
Right.
you can't pet it because there is no dog.
That's a good rule of thumb. You see a dog in a service dog harness, just it doesn't exist. And something else that I've seen lately, and this is not a good trend, and I hope that this ends, but a lot of people are putting service dog harnesses on their aggressive, I don't want to say aggressive. I was told not to use that word very much with dogs. Reactive. They're putting these on reactive dogs so that people won't touch them. Well, you're giving service dogs a bad name by having a reactive dog wear a service dog uniform and thereby creating these further rules, and we just keep taking advantage of the system.
Yeah. I think if you do have a reactive dog and you do want to warn people not to approach, the best method is to tell people not to approach your pet.
Right.
But also they have these great, really thick Mongolian collars that are very comfortable for dogs to wear and are large enough that you can add a do not pet um like patch or brooch on that, or even just like a do not pet, literally anything other than
Mm-hmm.
a service dog harness.
Well, and now they make vests that say do not pet. They make leashes that say do not pet. And like for us, we do have a reactive dog that we've been working with. And if I'm gonna be somewhere super busy, I'll just put a basket muzzle on him. Honestly, most people it terrifies them, but I'm like, hey, they're not gonna try to pet him, so no one's gonna get bit here.
Muzzles are this is like another topic entirely, but I think muzzles are so important as a part of the training process. I used to be of the complete opposite mindset, like, oh my gosh, like that's so like restrictive for the dog. And now
Yeah.
I'm like on the other side, every dog should be muzzle trained. But really it could be a life-saving moment. Even the most well-trained service dog is gonna have moments where they're just a dog and they're terrified and you need to be able to help them. And like having a muzzle trained dog in that moment could be, key to that situation. And a lot of service dogs are trained um, in wearing muzzles anyway, just as part of like their natural training.
Mm-hmm.
I think too, earlier you mentioned that it's really expensive, some of these training programs, and they are on average, it's about $1,500 in the US to either go through service dog training with a dog that you are bringing on your
Mm-hmm.
own, or to adopt a service trained dog. And in addition to all that money, which is due upon receipt of the dog, or upon the beginning of training, there's also like a huge wait list. And I think that combined with like this new, not new, but like rising any kind of service animals and emotional support animal culture, it makes it more difficult for people who do really need service dogs to be able to find reputable trainers, because there are all these scammers who are like, well, I know for a fact that I can get this money, don't even need to train this dog because people want the certification.
Right.
um, it's sad to see, it's upsetting, but if you need an emotional support animal, not a service animal, your therapist can write you a letter as part of your treatment, and that costs you your copay for therapy. I feel like this is going to be a controversial opinion, but I feel like if you are looking for that kind of like letter certification for an apartment, like more than just like my dog at the grocery store or my dog on the plane, although that's a whole different set, and like planes are going to start asking for things. But go to therapy. 6 weeks of therapy could benefit everybody. And most therapists agree that an emotional support animal will be of benefit to most of their patients. They're not going to be like, well, I need you to like prove that you really, like it's not,
Right.
if there's a gatekeeping thing,
Mm-hmm.
most insurances cover at least 6 sessions. So if you feel like this is a thing that would help me, and I cannot afford to pay 2 grand for a letter, don't pay 2 grand. That's a
Mm-hmm.
scam. A. And B, 6 weeks of therapy will get you the same letter for not 2 grand.
Right.
Also, now you have therapy. So still a
Right.
bonus.
Win-win. Yeah. I mean, we're coming out of a pandemic. I'm going to say coming out because I'm hopeful. I'm positive. I would like to think we're nearing the end. But so many people could probably genuinely benefit from going to therapy. So, hey, go to therapy, get your emotional support animal, make it all legitimate. Now, the service animal, that's totally different. That's a diagnosis of PTSD, depression, schizophrenia, diabetes, heart disease, so many different things. And there are some resources, there are some nonprofits that are really trying to work and to help people, get dogs or get on a wait list or cover a certain financial aspect of it. So that is an option. I think we're seeing a little bit more of it. One of the big ones that comes to mind is Wounded Warriors. So, they try to provide the dogs to soldiers, especially soldiers that have PTSD or issues when they come back from being on tour.
I was thinking Vets for Pets is another one, for service animals. The ASPCA, and also your local air quotes pound, but animal care and control office, county person.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about animal control on a upcoming episode, and I'm already excited about
Definitely a whole other episode.
it.
That office has great resources for both emotional support animals and service animals. I think sometimes they get a bad rap, but really they just want pets to be taken care of appropriately, in safe and healthy homes. And so if you um, are looking for a place to go for a grant, or you're even just looking for a place to train your support or service animal, that's a great place to start because they'll be able to direct you to the best place in your local community. Um,
Yeah, and if you're listening to this episode and you know anyone at any nonprofit or any of these organizations, please put me in touch. I would love to spread the wealth of knowledge and to just let people know where they can go because I mean that's the whole purpose behind this podcast is just getting out free knowledge. There's no gatekeeping here. We want people to know everything, to be equipped to so they can live their best life, their dog can live its best life. And yeah, I mean, pet care is expensive, dog care is expensive. Sometimes dealing with some of your mental or physical ailments, that's expensive. So that's really just the whole purpose of this podcast. Free resource.
Love me free resources. And I'm so glad to like be able to be a part of this. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to email in or comment on this episode when it comes out. And if you're listening to this, it is April 14th or later. So thank you, Nicole, for being on today's episode.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Canine Culture Podcast. Please make sure you subscribe to the Canine Culture Podcast on your favorite podcast platform and make sure you're following us on social media. If you have any recommendations, any topics that you'd like to hear, if you know of any guests that would be good for the show, or if you yourself want to be a guest, please reach out to us. Send us an email at canineculturepodcast@gmail.com or send us a direct message on social media. Thank you for listening, and please share this with any of your dog-loving friends.